Okay, welcome to Office Hours with Our Hometown, where we're going to be discussing some of the latest industry news. And if we have time, we'll look at this week's newsletter. But we've got a lot of news this week. The main event today is our interview with Damian Radcliffe from the University of Oregon. He's a professor of journalism and just super prolific guy, writes on the industry, a lot of the same things that we're focused on at Our Hometown in general, but specifically with Today in News Tech. So I'm excited about that interview. We'll have him on at 1:00. But until then, I thought we would just do some articles from TNT and just kind of get warmed up for the interview. So Tyler, you want to take it away with your top story?
This was an article that I had found on What's New in Publishing. And it is kind of covering something that we've talked a lot about, different ways to leverage your subscription model to make sure that you're getting the most out of your readers and your readers are getting the most out of their subscriptions.
And I think this is another example, another case study out of Europe. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. They're doing some innovative stuff there.
Yeah, it's an interesting website. I didn't really go into it in my write-up, but I think it's mainly aimed at expats. So it's keeping people that have moved to different European countries engaged with the communities that they moved to and from.
Well, I mean, yeah, that happens all the time in the States. I mean, probably even more so. It's easier to move, to a new state. And you got the snowbirds, of course. So, wow.
Yep.
Great content. Let's hear the video.
How subscription paywalls can increase audience engagement. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by What's New in Publishing about the local and its pivot to a more subscriber-focused content strategy. The article, The Power of Community, How a Small Publisher Hit 50,000 Paying Members Through Audience Engagement, discusses the ways the local has improved their metrics by gearing their reporting towards gaining and retaining subscribers. By shifting their focus from chasing ad dollars and page views, the local has created a business model that is almost entirely subscriber-funded. We made a conscious decision at management level that we would only succeed with a much tighter audience focus. This meant recalibrating our entire journalistic output, which didn't happen overnight, said the local's Paula Mahoney. Here are a few of our big takeaways. The local now makes 70% of its revenue from subscriptions, with the other 30% coming from advertising. Reader engagement is driven by two-way reporting where the local is constantly in communication with readers to ensure they are getting the content they want and need. The publisher closely tracks articles that convert to paid subscribers and uses that data to guide future reporting. A strong subscriber base can greatly improve a publication's sustainability, but having a solid strategy behind it is vital. Because of this, Our Hometown developed its WordPress platform with the tools to easily manage subscribers and track analytics to ensure they get the content they need.
Awesome. I guess I would just say right off the bat, it's more not a question, but more of an observation. That ratio, 70 to 30%, it reminds me of something, which is that it used to be the ratio for newspapers, but it was flipped. It was much more focused on advertising, more like 80-20 advertising to subscriptions 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now things are turning on their head. And this is an online only, as far as you know, Tyler, or do they have?
Yes, that's the impression that I got, especially since it's covering so many different countries. I can't imagine how this would work in print. So
right. The local is an awesome name for it too.
Yeah.
It's like you're hearing from the local guy. Let's just talk about this first point a little bit more. I don't think we have any hard data on this, but let's just talk like anecdotally. Terry, Vera, in your experience, how do our customers land? The small newspaper publisher that still has a print edition, is it 50-50, you think? Closer to 50-50? I think it might be for a lot of publishers. But what's your sense on this? Like, what's the split between subscriptions and ads?
I think since COVID, it's really flipped very similarly.
Mm-hmm.
Revenue now is generated more through subscriptions than through advertisers, mostly because advertisers have lost a lot of their budget due to the pandemic. Things have really changed.
I think it's just like put pressure on the whole system, the whole like economy of news, and it's just accelerated a lot of the trends that have already been there.
So I thought it was interesting. They explained kind of their trajectory on how they got there. And it's really interesting how incremental it was.
Right.
So like when they first launched this, they only had 8,000 subscribers. A year later, they had almost doubled that.
Right. Wow.
But then within the 2 years after that, like they went from 14,000 to 50,000, which just kind of shows A, that this can have a long tail, but B, how much of a difference this change in editorial strategy made.
These stats are interesting, like the fact that 70 to 30, but let's get to the tactics. Like you just said, what are they doing to get these numbers up there? I think two of your highlight points, especially one of them, really jumped out at me. Tell us a little bit about two-way reporting. What do you mean by that?
So two-way reporting was something that they kind of defined in the article, and it's mostly reporting that is in dialogue with your audience. Right. That's how I took it. So all of their stories are specifically aimed at something that will help their audience. And they're also constantly asking for feedback, which they incorporate into new stories.
Let's really dig into this one, because this is some super valuable stuff. It's not rocket science, it's literally asking for feedback and listening to your audience. But what tools do we have on WordPress that would facilitate this is my interest. So Terry and Vera, if you could start thinking about any examples you've seen of just reader feedback. We can talk about that in a second, but what's this quote? You want to walk us through this one?
So this is kind of just their broad mission statement, I guess.
Right.
But instead of covering a story just because it's big in the domestic media, they're always asking if it's important or if resources can be deployed in an issue that matters specifically to their members.
So that's the first thing, is putting that filter on yourself and not just writing about whatever kind of comes across your desk or whatever interests you personally. You got to have the audience in mind. And the other thing, this reminds me of us in a way, because I know with Today in News Tech in the beginning, I was really into the big tech stuff, and we still do cover that. But at a certain point, I had to realign myself and just say, like, does this actually impact our publishers in a way that they can act on? Obviously things that Facebook's doing impacts local news, but is there some kind of lesson that we can take away or strategy we can take to combat this issue, or, just deal with the changes? So maybe something along those lines for local publishers too, just like, don't talk about COVID just for the sake of talking about COVID. You talk about it if there's like some specific thing in the area that you're trying to promote, to help with the problem.
It either needs to be specific to your region or it needs to be actionable.
Great way to boil it down. Specific to the region, ideally both, but one or the other is like a minimum. That sounds good. And then in terms of thinking about the readers all the time, is there any details in here on how they get that feedback? Like literally, is it through just email? Is it on social media? Anything there?
Embedded forms is their big thing.
Right.
And they're always asking not just for input on stories that they're already writing, but for suggestions on what the readers would like to read about.
On WordPress, you've got Gravity forms, right? Terry, Vera, we could use that for creating a form like this, and then you can reuse that form anywhere on the site, right? You can just embed it in multiple stories or on the homepage, and it's the same form. Is that right?
Yeah, you can create countless forms.
So you could create specific forms for each story or each category, or maybe that might make sense there because it's different questions. But I think just starting with one generic form, that's, did you like this article? We're going to need to somehow capture what article they're on. Like, I think that could be part of the drop down.
I think a basic starting place, and he mentions it here, is that section at the bottom of every newsletter.
Right.
Which story interested you the most? Is there something else that you would like to see? Right.
A starting point is just asking for feedback and just handling it via email, because you're not going to be so overloaded that you can't respond to the emails or look at all of them. But once you start getting to a certain level and people are responding to those questions every time, maybe a form to turn it into more of a process, and then you can just export all the submissions.
I've seen plenty of forums about submit story ideas and things like that, but you could be more proactive and say, we're planning on doing a series on some civic thing.
Right.
that's happening in the local community.
Right.
And you're looking for specific subtopics that'll kind of fall under that umbrella. And you actually just produce that as a story, pin it as a top story on the website. And that's got the forms where people can throw out ideas, brainstorm with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
like
you could
that
also
idea.
have comments on the form submissions. So then it would kind of create this feedback loop of like, and really get some good ideas on what might be important. And it could be, you could even have a poll saying what types of series, and then that series would lead to one of these things. Say, oh yeah, we want to commit to a new big box store moving in, causing traffic problems.
Sure.
So, things like that would be definitely hyper local important to the community.
What I really
That's
like
great.
about that idea, Christopher, is that for a publisher who's just starting out with this process, start with the newsletter. That's a great place. It doesn't take a whole lot of thought. It's just kind of get your feet wet. And then you still, the way you described it, the publisher still has a bit of control rather than getting inundated with 1,000 emails on 1,000 different topics.
Right.
You selected a general topic and then thrown the invitation out there. I think that's a great idea to start.
There's two things I really like about Chris's idea. It gives them something to think about, tells them we are going to be talking about it, and then it stimulates the ideas that aren't going to come from just a generic request for ideas. And you kind of show that we've got momentum. We're going to be doing this. We are already working on it. So just throw your ideas in and it'll likely get picked up.
Another thing you could do there is also delineate between the subscribers.
Right.
Could have a different level of input versus just someone who's subscribed to the newsletter or something, or just visiting the site.
Right.
Time.
That's perfect.
Right. Yeah. It's like a meta story too. It's like a story about writing stories, So you said write an article that's calling attention to this call for submissions. I think it's a great idea too. And when the idea comes in through the form, then it would be automatically connected with the topic and then these subtopics, because like a long investigative piece is going to have many different angles to it. So many things we could say on this, but I mean, we've got to keep it brief today. So Vera, did you want to throw in anything else? I don't want to skip over you.
I did. Matamo actually has visitors log. So you can see your power users. So you could use them as a focus group and send out the form just to those users. Another thing is if you look at your comments section, you can see who's posting comments and who's regularly on there. So that could be another part of a focus group. That's just something I would do myself.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that data in a second. Is this the third point that you want to go over here, Tyler?
Yeah. Basically, this point is something that I think would be great if we don't already have a clear way to implement.
Right.
And I think we've talked about this in other contexts in the past of specifically tracking which stories. I think we were talking about donations when we were kind of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we were. That's interesting to me because, the donation or a micropayment, the person decided to pay for that one article. So that article is something people are willing to pay directly for, just that one story. That's a very clear signal. He's talking about something slightly different here.
I mean, instead of just a donation, this is which articles are converting to paid subscriptions. So I would say that's even slightly more valuable because it's a type of article that will get you a recurring customer rather than a one-time.
Here's the thing about this. I think it is definitely more valuable because you're making more money. But the thing is it necessarily that story? I mean, I know that's what made them go over the edge, but when you're buying an all access subscription, what's going on in the back of the buyer's mind is all these other stories that I could have read. But no doubt about it, if that story triggered the purchase, there's something special about that story. I just don't know if it's quite the same as a story initiating a donation.
Yeah, I would almost say, and like Vera was saying, tracking your power users, I would look at the story that triggers the subscription and then trace back what they had been reading before then. It's
probably a whole string of 4 or 5 articles until they hit the paywall. I guess that's another thing to think about because some of these are going to have meters on them. So someone looking at multiple stories and they get all this momentum, they're really interested, and then they hit the paywall. And it's on that article that they decide to pay. But you're right. It's really the articles before it that were a factor. They were all building up to that purchase. Let's talk real quick about this. I think the best way to do it would be probably with goals in Matimo. And we probably don't have time to go into a demo today, but we should add this to our list of things to go over, creating goals and then tracking them, because what that means is you can create a goal that's like, this page was loaded, which in this case would be the subscription confirmation page. And then as soon as that goal is triggered, then it tracks that goal and it tracks that whole visitor's experience. And like Tyler said, you can go back and look at what they were doing before they actually hit the goal. That's technically how we would do it on our system, I think would be the best way, but we'll explore that more in the future, how that could be done on WordPress. Anything else you want to say about this story? Great one, Tyler, really.
The only other thing I was going to mention is this little sentence that I wish they'd kind of gone more in depth with, but I found it an interesting idea, is they use app notifications that push readers closer to the paywall. So I'm guessing what that means, my interpretation is they're notifying readers to try and keep them engaged with the app, so that they're using up their paywall, so that they see the value in continuing to pay.
That's perfect, because that's one thing I was going to mention is subscriber fatigue. The value really has to be, I'll say it again, you got to toot your own horn. You've got to show your readers that you are valuable. And one way to do that, I think, is this process, getting feedback from the readers or ideas. I see a real clear plan right here. This is awesome.
And if you're going to start doing that reader feedback, it definitely would make sense. The more I think about it, to start with the newsletter and really targeting your paying subscribers. I mean, if the email goes to a non-paying subscriber, that's fine. But really just selling that as a benefit of being a subscriber, I think is smart.
Right. And I think putting the call to action at the end of the newsletter is a good idea, because then you're getting your most engaged newsletter readers that are actually getting to the bottom. So
that's a good way to think about it. Yeah. Because with such limited space in a newsletter, to just throw it up front, that's kind of simplistic thinking. Like, I want everyone to see this. There's some people where they just glaze over it anyway. I think that's something to experiment with. You could do A/B tests with that and just see who's clicking on this more and giving us feedback. All great stuff. Okay, but we got to keep it moving. So let's turn it over to Chris.
This is from Google's blog. The keyword is kind of like the first source. And then I found this through SEO Engine Land when I was just doing some SEO searching. I guess we'll just do a quick little playthrough here and then we'll get right into it.
Google search results now increase exposure for local news content. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by Henry Powderly over at Search Engine Land. The article, Google Adds Local News Features to Search, Giving Publishers More Exposure, discusses new search features recently released by Google. Now when you enter a search term, results may include more locally related content. This includes a new social media carousel of related tweets. The feature is an expansion of Google's inclusion of localized content from COVID-19 searches. Social media can give readers additional information that they may be looking for about local issues. We recently launched a new way to help people find local information on the topics they're searching for by surfacing tweets by local authoritative sources and authors, including tweets from news organizations, from Google's blog, The Keyword. Here are a few of the big takeaways. Queries on Google search like News Near Me have increased threefold over the past 5 years, reaching an all-time high during the COVID-19 pandemic in May 2020. The local results are not just reserved for local publishers, just local content, i.e. sources with news about the user's location, which may include national reporting as well. Accordingly, good search engine optimization, SEO, is essential for a publisher to be included in this new carousel and local news feature. Managing a publisher website's SEO can be a tricky endeavor, which is why all websites hosted by Our Hometown include a sophisticated SEO dashboard allowing for extensive control of how site content appears in search results.
Nice. Let's ask some questions here. Does anyone have questions about this? How does this apply to local publishers? Like I said, I don't think it's really any different than just Google News. You want to get yourself in Google News and optimize the site for SEO, but specifically submit to Google News.
They mentioned it down here at the bottom as new CEOs, why good SEO is essential. Although the inclusion of getting on Google News, I read on another article, is now automated. You don't actually apply. So that's why SEO tools that we have on the back end of the WordPress sites allow you to tweak all of that kind of stuff to catch the eye, I guess, of the spiders that are scraping all the sites.
I think what it actually is that you don't have to apply, but if for some reason they haven't picked you up yet, you can still apply. And even if they have picked you up, I think then you can claim your account, because you would take some code from Google, put it on your site to verify that you're the owner. And then,
this is the related article on, on ways you can kind of check the search console for Google and things like that to see how they're actually seeing your site, and also what types of things to use, URLs, RSS feeds, and things like that will get you into that algorithm machinery a bit.
Well, another practical thing from this that I would take away, if you could go back to the article, I think they had some screenshots. So there's this, they're pulling in, they have a little widget from news sites, but then they also have this social widget now.
Yeah, I brought up Google. Just let's see what's going on.
Let's see what's in Rochester.
In Rochester, as you can see, I've done that one a couple times.
New York.
So look
news,
what pops up here. You get a top stories widget, which then has more news.
Right.
The Democrat and Chronicle is our print. There's a TV station. This is another TV station. All of these are TV stations, but then you also get just from individuals that are tweeting relevant things. You can see, there's Monroe County Fire Department.
Yep.
It's got some things in there. Look at this. You even got right lane closed over on Goodman Street. It's down to that kind of granular level, just right there, because they're pulling directly from the tweets. This is 3 hours ago, 17 hours ago.
That's cool.
Things like that. And then if you click on that, it basically just takes you over to a Twitter search
with that search
on that same topic. So that's where they're pulling the content from.
Wow. All right. Well, then just yet another reason to not just optimize SEO, but optimize your social media presence, because then you could have two spots right here, right at the top of Google search. You could have the article from the website and then the tweet about it right underneath. So
because I believe this top stories, if I click on more news, I'm assuming these are the Google News approved outlets, not just any random old thing. That's why these are all just the print papers and the TV stations and things. But that's why this social carousel is so important, because it gets outside of that box and you get much more varied, but still local stories about whatever's going on.
Yeah. And then they're taking it to the next level and not just taking the geolocation of the person doing the tweet, but also I guess what they're talking about. They must be using some natural language processing. If they're talking about Rochester, but they're located in New York City or something, their tweets would still show up here.
I assume so, or at least at the very, it may be almost too specific, because in the original article, they had stuff where you would just do a search for football. And because it would know your location, it would give you football related stories. But a lot of those might come from that could come from ESPN, or it could come from a local Detroit paper.
Wow.
I can give that let's see, soccer. So we get ESPN, Daily Mail. And if you look at this one, there's no
local news.
There's no social media.
Thing
here. There's no carousel on this one.
Yeah. I mean, who knows how they're rolling this out, but I think it is interesting that, of course, Google has all this information and they can just say, wow, one of the biggest terms that people used was news near me, in the last year.
Yeah. They use even their own Google Trends
widget the past 5 years
to demo that.
Yep.
And if I scroll down a little bit more, this is basically it's saying football, but this is on a mobile device. So that may be why you would get this hyperlocal social feed, and it's more on the mobile side of things. In this blog post, they talk about a few tools for reporters, data gathering and things like that, which I thought was interesting, but wasn't as pertinent to what the original search engine. They were just highlighting some of the new UI features of the the search results. It's just a quick overview of that kind of specific search result that seems to lend itself to really getting some extra exposure, especially for non-Google News affiliated sites.
You want to just fill out those social profiles in as much detail as you can. We'll talk about this on the SEO webinar, but you want to definitely put your city, state in your Twitter profile because all these platforms are using that to make this stuff happen.
Well, this and also Twitter hashtags. A lot of Rochester uses the hashtag ROC in their tweets, and that can just provide all kinds of things. And then for our own publishers, if you're publishing to Twitter, but you're publishing the article that links back, so just a blurb that links back, make sure that these social media feeds that pop up in the search will then at some point lead them back to your site instead of just staying on the search results page.
Oh, yeah, right, exactly. It's a wide net, however you want to say it. You just want to get it out there so that it's easy for these platforms to pick it up because this is where people go. I mean, we can't argue with that. If there's a local news story, you'll check one of two places, the local newspaper website or Google. And, Google's just got such a hold on people. That's the place you go to ask questions. So, we really just want to work well with them and just make our content accessible through that channel. Fantastic, guys. Thanks for watching Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.